Welcome to another episode of the Will Frederick podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. And today we're going to talk about a secret way to buy properties that many of you may have heard about, but not many people actually know about. It's a little something called subject to financing. Our friend Courtney is going to join us again today. She's an expert on this type of financing. Courtney, how many times have you done a subject to deal?
I haven't counted it, but for sure dozens, if not towards getting closer toward the 100.
Most of what I know about subject to, I've heard from you, and I've had some other resources as well. But Courtney is a tremendous resource, and Courtney Fricke, by the way, is she is the founder of the North Shore Real Estate Investor Association, and she also has a YouTube channel with lots of great resources on it, and you can find her at CourtneyFricke.com. So I'd highly recommend you checking her out. So Courtney, let's talk about subject to financing. Define it. What is subject to financing? Well,
thanks again for having me. Let's dive on into it, because this is a topic everyone's hearing about, right? Yeah, they're getting the ads on social media. Right now, right? It's real popular. Mm-hmm. So for me, subject to, you need to define what are you doing subject to, right? Yeah. It's a disclosure at best. Mm-hmm. So what it is generally speaking, when people say it, they're buying subject to an existing loan.
Okay. And now, you're subject to that existing loan.
So you're purchasing a house subject to an existing loan staying in place, meaning the seller has a loan that you want to stay in place. So because normally when you sell a property, you pay that loan off. Right?
Normally, yeah. That's the normal way.
That's the normal process. But what we're saying is, hey, we just had historically low 2, 3, 4, 5% loans that you can't go get right now.
Right.
And so what we're saying is, no, don't pay it off.
Yeah, don't pay it off. Keep that loan.
That has value to me in this market. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing is saying, hey, we're going to purchase the property. Title is going to transfer to us, and that loan is going to stay in place.
So this title does transfer in a subject to financing. That is something that I did not know.
Okay. In a traditional subject to, it does.
Okay.
And so ultimately, we're buying subject to existing financing, staying in place, existing loan.
Okay.
Now, for clarity, again, subject to is a disclosure. You're buying subject to what? When you sell a property that has a renter in it and another investor buys it, you're selling it subject to a lease.
Subject to the current lease. That's correct.
Or when you buy a property that has an easement or some right-of-way, you're buying it subject to that easement or right-of-way. So it's important to know, what are you buying subject to? It's common in the sense where, plenty of people have bought properties where there was a lease in place and or there was an easement or something.
That's a great example, because subject to just means you're kind of submitted to whatever else is in place. So it's just an extra set of guidelines on the property purchase.
Exactly. Okay. And so it's an important thing to understand, what are you buying it to? And so that's also important. We'll talk soon eventually about, you need to look into the loan. You need to look into those details, because what are you buying that's staying in place.
Exactly. So for buyers, for sellers, who does subject to, like, why would you do a subject to financing as a seller, as a buyer? Like, who does it benefit?
Sure. And so anyone can do this, any seller or any buyer. Okay. For example, you know what a HUD-1 statement is?
Yeah.
They're at every single closing.
Right. They call them settlement or closing disclosures now. I don't
so
think
it is a form, the HUD-1 statement, and it has a lot of different lines on it, and they put all the cost and the different numbers for a closing, and it just discloses all the trends. Did you know that on section 503, on line 503, it says on the HUD-1, existing loans taken subject to? So there's literally a place on the
HUD-1 for that.
And so
that is not something I ever noticed before. And I've looked at literally thousands of those.
Those HUD-1s. And so one of those things, there's a lot of people like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do a subject to, or no, this isn't, whether they say, legal. But my response to that is, a confused mind says no. It's just, it has been going on for decades. It's nothing new, which is why it's on the HUD-1.
Now, and there's something else I'd like to bring up here, because it's basically an avenue by which any loan can be an assumable loan, essentially. Would that be fair to say?
I would actually say it's not an assumption, because a traditional assumption is you're going to the lender and saying, here's my credit, here's my qualifications, here's my credentials.
Okay.
Qualify me, and I'm going to take over this 3% loan, and I'm going to step into the seller's shoes on that loan.
Yeah.
And the seller may or may not still stay involved maybe to some level of responsibility.
Okay.
Now that's an assumption.
So the bank has to bless that, essentially.
Yep, on an assumption. On a subject to, the bank isn't blessing it, right? It is the seller is selling, keeping, and it's keeping in, the loan is keeping in place. And then the buyer is making the payments to that loan on the seller's behalf. And it can all be done legally, ethically, morally, with a title company, with the right paperwork, the right transaction. Like I said, it's on the HUD-1, which is a very common formal document. I think a federal document that HUD made.
Yeah.
So it's made there. But yeah, so who's a good fit?
Yeah.
For sellers, so some common situations are when it's taking longer to sell, and the seller is saying, "Hey, I'm juggling 2 mortgages. I bought a new house. I have my old house on the market. It's taking longer to sell. I'm now paying 2 mortgages. But we know, hey, here, maybe this house is taking longer to sell because, maybe just the conditions of the market, or maybe because of, the offers they're getting is less than what they owe.
Yeah, price range is usually
different things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a common situation. I actually own a property right up the street that I bought subject to the existing loan because it was a rental and they lost their tenants. And so then they were paying 2 mortgages for a while and they didn't want to go put the money into the repair the property to sell it.
Right.
And so they said, hey, we can't juggle 2 payments here. And our cash offer was less than what they owed on the mortgage.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we said, hey, but here is a way that we could potentially help solve your problem.
Right.
So another avatar though is when someone is facing foreclosure, they have, first of all, their own timeline.
Yeah.
But they ultimately, a lot of times, the offers they may be getting in, if they're less than what they owe on their loan, they may be limited to who they can sell to.
Right.
But if someone understands subject to, they could then potentially say, hey, because, for example, I could pay more because the interest rate's lower, right? Because right now, if they pay with cash, a lot of times cash isn't always cash. Sometimes that cash comes with a loan, right? Like a private loan. Or what if a homeowner was selling a house at $200,000? Now,
and let me stop you for a second there. So you're saying when you're saying cash comes with a loan, you mean like
sometimes
I'm paying cash, but I'm really taking it off of a line of credit or borrowing it from hard money or something like that.
And so the seller would be receiving that, and but so for example, if someone's selling a house at $200,000, well, if someone, even if it's not cash, they're going and getting a loan at $200,000, their monthly payment is going at, right now at 6-7% is going to be a certain rate.
Right.
But if that seller has a loan for $200,000 and they have a 3% loan on it, that monthly payment is a lot more affordable to a buyer.
30 to 40% less. Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So there's benefits to both the seller and the buyer.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with sellers, this is an option when, especially if it's more difficult to sell, which so I consider myself a solutions-based investor, but creative financing is a strong tool when solutions are needed.
Well, that's why we're doing this show, because I really want to help people understand there are tools out there to accomplish the goal. You need to understand, you need to be really clear on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
And what tools can get you across that finish line. Because most people, for a long time, it's just been a traditional sale has been easy because the market's been really flush with cash. Sure. Money's been cheap. Now those things have changed, and so we need to look at different options.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for helping us with this.
No, well, look, and absolutely, I've been doing this for the last decade, but right now this is becoming a buzzword. Subject to is becoming a buzzword. And look, it's nothing new. A lot of my mentors have been doing this since the 60s and 70s. They were buying subject to in the 70s and the 80s, right? And so know that it's nothing new, but it's a good tool to use in certain situations.
So I have a question. So you said an assumption is when that buyer goes to the bank, gets qualified, and they take over the loan. I can see reasons why banks really wouldn't want to do that right now, because banks really want to get rid of that 3% money, and they want to relend it at 6 or 7.
Yep.
So is this a way? Is there any risk associated with basically just not telling the bank and saying, hey, I'll do this? Like, how does title transfer when the loan actually doesn't transfer? Is that what you're saying? Like, the loan doesn't transfer.
So the loan, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the risk. I want to talk about the risk for the seller and then the risk for the buyer.
Yeah, that's great.
So with the seller, so it is the loan staying in place. It's the loan that's in their name. Okay, so title has transferred. The loan is staying tied to the property. That loan is tied to their credit. Okay, right? Most loans have a personal
credit. Yeah.
Yep. Most loans have a personal guarantee that says, "Hey, I'm going to make these payments, right? And my credit is impacted if I don't." But the other part is, and you know what this is, so let's explain it. It's called the DTI, their debt to income. Correct. Yeah. So that loan is basically on their credit as a on a personal income and debt statement. You're going to have all your debts and your income. So when you go to get a loan, they say
lenders look at that and say your debt to income ratio. The lenders want to feel comfortable that you can afford what you're looking to buy.
So one risk to a seller is it stays on their debt to income.
Right.
So most people can't afford 2 mortgages.
Right.
One with the income that they make, they can't go out and have 2 mortgages. They can only afford to have one based on their income.
Right.
Now there's a caveat to that. We have worked around that, but it's one of those things that generally takes time, and it takes paperwork and us working with the lender. Showing after, let's say 12 months of payments made on their behalf on this loan that we took subject to with this property, then the lender will say, hey, we can
remove that from your
debt to income.
Yeah.
Either all of it, but a lot of times they'll remove all but maybe 25% of it. And a lot more people can handle that, let's just say it's a $200,000 loan. They can handle, that being on their credit, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so their debt to income. So those are some risks, right? And they're very real ones. And so the number one thing I preach with subject to is full disclosure.
Yeah.
Everyone needs 100%. To know what they're getting into because it can be a good solution, but it's like you want to understand what you're getting into. So those for the seller, that's a risk. And then the third risk.
Well, before you go any further, I want to highlight what you just said because
today's episode is sponsored by the Kinchin Group. The Kinchin Group is a one-of-a-kind real estate consulting firm specializing in the development and management of owner-financed properties. Their innovative approach to real estate investment is based on more than a decade of hands-on experience. By managing your real estate portfolio, they help maximize the return on your investment while eliminating the stress of owner financing. Whether you're a first-time investor hoping to break into the real estate market or a seasoned developer looking to diversify your holdings, they're here to help you get the most out of your land.
Sometimes some creative financing people are get this people think they're kind of shady and shystery and trying to pull something and take advantage of people. But I know you, and you wouldn't be on this show because you know me. If this wasn't a fully disclosed situation where we're saying, hey, here are the risks. And here's how we mitigate those risks. Here's how we get around that. We want you to be fully aware of what you're doing because we don't want to put anybody at a bad spot.
Absolutely.
We're both playing the long game. We're like,
absolutely.
We're not looking 20 years hence for somebody to say, oh man, they really took advantage of me. I don't want to. So I appreciate that about you. And I want to make sure our audience knows that when you go do this type of thing, you need to make sure you're helping everybody understand fully what the risks are so they can go into it feeling comfortable and you're truly helping them.
Well, all parties being informed will make the consent, the agreement of the deal that more valid.
Exactly.
And that's how the deal works. And so, and it's the reason why I have taught about, subject to and other creative financing alongside attorneys. I have taught agents for years on these topics. And so, and it's like, hey, look, all parties need to understand. Okay. And so that requires someone who knows what they're doing, right?
What about the due on sale clause?
Yep. So that's a third risk to a seller. Okay. The due on sale clause.
Oh, I already beat that. You were going there anyway.
Nope. So, hey, but no, I appreciate it. So the due on sale clause, just about every mortgage has a clause. Mortgages can be pages and pages long, like 10 to 15 pages long.
Sometimes longer than that.
There's going to be a clause that says, hey, if you ever sell the property, transfer title, transfer your interest, but you do not pay us off. We have the right, but not the obligation to accelerate the remainder of what's owed to be paid. It's called the amount is due on the sale.
On the sale.
Now, it has to be called. It does not automatically trigger. So what the bank is saying is they reserve the right to call it. They want to reserve the option to not call it.
Sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So something that's really important is it's not illegal. They're telling you right there, okay, if you transfer it, we want to reserve the right to say you have to pay us.
Yeah.
But we also reserve the right to say, no, you can just keep making us payments.
Right.
Right.
And banks really generally want the payments. Like
they're
they don't
chasing
want
payments,
the property
not
back.
real estate. Yep.
Yeah.
And so we always talk about that because it's really important. Most mortgages have that. And so that is a risk because if the due on sale was called, they're generally going to send a letter and say, hey, Courtney, you have 30 days. The balance on the loan is $200,000. You have 30 days to pay it. So that's a really, right. Now there are some workarounds for it, and that's a longer video. And so when I do trainings, whether it's for buyers or for whoever else, there are workarounds on that.
Okay.
And they're not guaranteed, but there are a handful of workarounds on that. But to basically solve that issue and continue making those payments. But that's why I say, hey, sellers, they need to know this because that could happen, right? And that's also a really important factor here because when someone is buying, so let's go to the risk for the buyer. Let's talk about the due on sale from a buyer's point. Okay, let's just say they have a 3% loan. That's great.
Yeah.
But because of some of the risk, and I'm going to go into, there's generally 4 risk with subject to
on the buyer side.
On the buyer side, is that because of those risks, that 3% really is only guaranteed on a monthly basis, right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not like, even if there's 29 years left on the loan, there's not, you have to think of subject to debt as a month-to-month
temporary debt. You said that earlier.
So that's one of those things is I tell buyers, you've got to think about that in that degree. So with the due on sale, your biggest solution for the due on sale clause is having enough equity in the property that you could go refinance it. And
Gotcha. Yeah.
a refinance is anywhere from 70 to 80% of the value of the property.
Right. Yeah.
So if someone is buying, let's just say the property is worth, for easy numbers, $100,000. If you go buy it subject to $100,000 loan and the due on sale gets called, you're going to have to bring 20 to 30,000 to the table just to refinance it. And you're refinancing at today's rate. It may not cash flow. You may not afford the payment, something like that.
You could be stuck.
So there's a level there that it's kind of, you've got to be mindful of your purchase price.
Make sure you have that equity in there built in,
Correct. And so those are some important things, right? If you had 30 days if you had to sell a property in 30 days, it's important. You have to understand.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So the due on sale.
So how often does that due on sale happen? Because I know that's a question in a lot of people's minds.
So that's a really great point. I have never had it called on me.
So you've never ever had one?
I've never had one called on me. Okay. I feared that one would happen.
Oh, sure.
But it didn't.
Okay.
Like on this one specific property, but it didn't.
Okay.
But what
made you fear that it would happen?
We had a ton of issues with insurance.
Oh, okay.
And
gotcha. So the bank was kind of...
Yeah, there's some common triggers for the due on sale. It can often be for a few different reasons. And I thought, man, we were hitting all the triggers, and I thought it was going to then equal into that. But by the grace of God, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I also had options in case it did.
Well, you always want to have the safety net. Sure.
Well, and that's why I'm a huge believer in practicing safe financing, even on the creative side. So, all right. So subject to, we've talked about the risk on due on sale for seller and buyer. It happens rarely. I will say I have seen it happen a little bit more these days.
Okay.
So we are watching that.
So, but it's never happened to you.
Never happened to me.
And I think I sat in one of the RIA meetups and I think I remember there was a guy who was there who has done maybe even thousands of them. And he had said he had only one situation ever, and he went to the bank, and I can't remember exactly the story, but he went to the bank and they basically worked it out to where they backed away from it. They said, all right, we'll let you keep paying.
So one of my main mentors, Pete, has done hundreds. He may have done
it might have been him. I can't remember.
So he's had 5 over the decades.
Okay.
And so and I've studied each of the ones he had. I said, let's sit down and talk.
Yeah, I want to understand
each
why.
one.
Yeah.
And so So those are risks that both sides need to know.
Very small percentage.
Yep.
And they actually went through with it. He had to refi or pay it off or whatever. Okay.
So that's one of four. The second one, and I'm gonna be quick with these other three, because that's the big one everyone worries about.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: both parties need to know they exist, and so that they're aware. But then the buyer needs to know, okay, what are my options if it happens, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the other risk is, okay, great. You're being able to buy a property you're with a great loan in place that you're not qualifying for. You don't have to bring your credit.
Right.
It's
not on your credit.
It's not on your credit.
It's not on your DTI. DTI is a consideration for the seller, but not the buyer, which is great.
And it's not tied to your credit. It's not tied to your income. It's not tied to, you're not having to bring your tax returns, your W-2s, all that. But at the same time, that's also the risk. It's tied to someone else. So, for example, if that person passes away, they then go through a process, the probate succession process, right? And that is sometimes, often it's done, always done with an attorney, right? But sometimes it goes into the courts, right? And what they do is they look at all their assets and debts of the estate. And so at that point, there's risk because you may have to go and represent yourself and to explain to the court that this is debt that's in their name, but it's tied to an asset they no longer owned. Let me show you the paperwork. You might have to go represent your
but all the paperwork's there. It's all legitimate. It's all legal, provided you do it in the right way.
The risk is you then might have to hire an attorney to go represent you to explain the situation. Okay.
All right.
But further than that, all your paperwork is for someone who's no longer alive. So all of that paperwork, now you have to go redo all your paperwork because paperwork, the type of paperwork we're talking about, doesn't always... most of that paperwork does not extend past that person
survive
dying.
The person, right?
So like a power of attorney.
Do wills address that? If they have a will?
Well, so it's one of those things where you're protected because title is transferred and all the paperwork was done. But for example, one of them is a limited power of attorney. So where you can go work with the bank, you can go deal with insurance. If there's an insurance check that's made out to them, you can actually cash it based on that limited power of attorney. Limited power of attorneys do not survive death.
Yeah, you're correct.
So what we've actually had sellers from a subject to deal pass away. We actually then had to go to the heirs and get them to re-sign paperwork. Right. So the risk is there's cost involved with that. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's a
hassle.
headache.
Like what if the heirs won't sign something or
exactly. And we had to chase them down. They were in different states, right?
Sure.
So that's a risk. The second one is, let's just say it's a husband and wife that are on the loan, and then they are, so you're buying it subject to, and both of them sign on all the paperwork. What if they go through a divorce? Right? So then divorces are often handled by attorneys, maybe even going into the court system. And what do? They look at all the debts and the assets tied to that marriage. And then they're going to say, hey, we need to either satisfy debts, we need to, split assets, things like that. Right. So again, part of that issue may be you may have to, hire an attorney to then explain the situation to that attorney.
Gotcha.
Oftentimes probate attorneys that deal with, the death and successions, or you've got divorce attorneys. They're not familiar with this type of real estate law or things like that. So you may say a confused mind says no. They may say, oh well, wait, what's going on here? Yeah. Okay. Then the third risk is going to be bankruptcy. Again, that's another one that's handled by attorneys, and that goes into the court system at a certain level. And so again, that is a risk because part of what's tied to the house is a debt. In bankruptcy, you're trying to extinguish or restructure debt, right?
Right.
Because you can't pay it, right? And so, for example, depending on the level of bankruptcy they're filing, that's a huge red flag for me.
So is this you talking about the seller?
The buyer. So this is if I am a buyer
is filing for bankruptcy
and the seller
that's
files
the loan, that's essentially your loan, even though it's still their loan.
Right, but it's tied to my asset, and so there's a huge
asset. Sure.
So I'm very much involved in it, and so if they're filing bankruptcy, now the court is going to be involved with that debt.
Yeah.
And so again, there's risk there. So those are all three big, including the fourth one being the due on sale. Those are things that buyers need to understand. Sellers need to understand, buyers need to understand. And so for me, that's why I say subject to debt has risk to it.
Sure,
it's inherently risky debt, but I consistently still buy when I build in protections, you know, and safety nets.
And so you wouldn't, I mean, these it sounds to me like there's more risks for the buyer than the seller, maybe. I mean, I guess it just
there's different types of risk.
Different types of risks. It would be a better way to put it.
At the same time, deals get done when it can be a solution and there's benefits, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there's obviously still benefits as well.
So take us through a subject to financing deal that you've done recently. Give us an example.
So this is one that's in Robert, Louisiana. Okay. And actually, so an agent called me and said, "Hey, Courtney, can you please help me? I have a seller and we're in a bit of a pickle." Okay. The property was listed on the market and it was in a neighborhood of, let's just say 30 houses. Okay. It was a 2010 build. Okay. So relatively newer, but everything else on the market was a brand new construction. The rest of all the lots they're either currently being built, just finished being built. So like the rest of the neighborhood was being built.
Yeah.
And so you're competing with a 2023 build and a 2010 in a slower market.
Right.
So first of all, that's if in general, if you're a second phase build, you're competing against, your first phase build competing against a second phase build, that's going to take a little bit longer.
Right, but this was even more drastic.
Because they were also facing foreclosure. So then they had to sell on a tight timeline.
Oh, yeah.
So normally in that situation, if you lower the price, if you give it enough time, it'll eventually sell, right?
Right.
But this one, they didn't have that.
Right, they didn't
So the agent called me and said, "Hey, we think we're priced right, but I mean, like, they were priced at $204,000. And everything on the market was like $230,000, $250,000 for the new construction. You and I both know someone's going to look at a 2010 at that price and a 2023 at that price and say, sold on the 2023.
Exactly right, yeah.
So here's what we ultimately did. They just said, look, we just want to get out from underneath this, stop the foreclosure, and just be able to move past this situation. So at that point, I was able to purchase it. So the balance on the loan was $176,000 and some change. It was a 3.875% loan.
Wow.
And it was a 2020 loan. And so it was 3 years into the loan. There was 27 years left on it. Okay. The monthly payment then was $1,190. That was the principal, interest, taxes
and insurance. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Escrows too.
But the escrows were based on it being an owner-occupied property. Okay. And I wasn't going to move into it.
Right.
So I knew taxes and insurance were going to go up.
Yeah.
Currently, my PITI, I've owned this property for a year. And I wanted to share this because it was a good case study to see what happens in a year.
Right, yeah.
Currently, my unpaid principal balance, it's $152,000. So I've been paying down.
So how long have you had this one?
For a year.
Okay, that's right. You said a year.
One of the things, I didn't say this.
Did you pay down some principal?
Let me say this. Out of pocket, at closing, I brought $28,500.
Okay, gotcha.
That paid for the closing cost. I paid for the agent's commissions for both of us. And then I had to pay for $21,000 of the arrears to catch up the loan.
Okay.
And so because they were in foreclosure.
So that was the 170 something that was owed. And then now it's down to 150.
Part of that 21 went toward principal.
Okay, gotcha.
So I had to catch up the loan. I've been making the payments. My current PITI, principal, interest, tax, insurance, is $1,339 versus the $1,100 they were paying.
$150 or something. Yeah.
And so,
or $200.
But the reason why that's really important is, as an investor, I know I have to calculate. There's going to be some adjustments. There's going to
be some increase. Yeah.
The sellers love it. Here's some benefits. So for me, I was able to buy a property with a 3.875% interest rate.
Cheap money. Right.
Cheaper money. Okay. The sellers were able to stop, the foreclosure was stopped. They were able to get the speed they needed, right? The other thing is I'm now making on-time payments for them. What do you think's happening to their credit?
True.
It's improving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because they were struggling making on-time payments. When you make on-time payments over a long period of time, your credit improves.
Yeah, your credit goes up.
So it's actually benefiting their credit.
Sure.
And they were able to stop the foreclosure.
That's a great benefit for the buyer that I wasn't even thinking about.
Yeah, so the seller, they avoided that foreclosure. So that major hit to their credit. Their credit was bruised at that point because of the behind payments, things like that. But now we're establishing on-time payments for them. There is that benefit.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So let me ask you this. What is you, as an investor, what is your game for that property?
So that is the only furnished property that I have.
Okay.
Because it's actually right near a training facility for where my significant other works, and that's where they go for training. So it actually is what's called a midterm rental. We rent it out for a few weeks to a month plus at a time.
Okay.
And it's furnished, all utilities and everything included.
So it's a like not a short term, not a long term, but a midterm rental. Thank you for taking us through the nuts and bolts of what a subject to financing is. So
look, a lot of people are hearing about it right now. It's a big deal. A lot of people talking about, but it's nothing new. Do it safely.
Yeah.
Do it correctly, run the numbers right, and inform everyone involved.
Well, it sounds like there are ways to make it safe. It sounds like there are ways to mitigate those risks, and that's really what we want to help people understand. Understand the risks, and then take steps to properly mitigate them. That is absolutely the goal, is to solve problems, right? Like you always say. Well, thank you, Courtney. I really, really appreciate you enlightening us on those topics today.
Yeah,
and
my pleasure, you guys.
Thank you for watching today. Another episode of the Will Frederick podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life.